A day of condolences in the wake of the Bondi terror attack, and joining me live in the studio is the Shadow Home Affairs Minister, Duniam. Senator, thanks for your time. How do you reflect on today and the nation's response? Why, as a parliament, has it been important to pause, pay tribute and reflect on what was our worst terrorist attack upon our nation?
Well, it is important as a national parliament we do take time to actually honour those people who lost their lives, their families and the entire community they were a part of. Worst terrorist attack on Australian soil in our history, and 15 innocent people gunned down just because of who they were and the faith they had, the community they were a part of. So it is important we do send a message as a national parliament that we are all together, that we don't stand for allowing to continue to happen what has happened and led to these events, and it is an appropriate mark of respect, followed up by, I hope, some good progress on legislation that helps deal with some of the issues that, as I said, led to what happened in Bondi last year.
And can you elaborate on that for us? Because we know the government has put aside the vilification law proposals, but there is a whole chunk of other hate laws that need to be dealt with. Will we see progress?
Well, that's the hope. I mean, the process has been shambolic from day one. What we're doing now should have happened right at the beginning. This is a national response requiring unity, requiring everyone to be on the same page in order to, in a uniform, united way, stamp out anti-Semitism and extremism that we saw, Islamic extremism that we saw feeding into this. So we are working through a range of provisions in what remains of the bill. It is excellent that the racial vilification provisions were kicked out. They were unworkable, and the cost, the potential impacts on freedom of speech were not worth contemplating in the rushed process we're going through. What's left, we are working through, and the government and opposition are working together to try and get the best outcome possible. But again, we should have done this right at the beginning. Can
we just recap for our viewers who might not be across all the detail when it comes to the hate speech, so the vilification, hate speech component, the free speech risk that you said, to one side, it's not going to be dealt with. What we are going to see is prescribed hate groups, a tougher approach to hate groups, hate preachers,
yes,
visa granting, the ability to deport preachers as well. Is that essentially the key components of what's left?
That's correct. There is, of course, also the firearms legislation that the Labor Party and the Greens have agreed on. That is a separate bill. But yes, dealing with visa, ability for the minister to revoke or refuse a visa on the basis of someone spreading hate and extremism, dealing with the hate groups as well, listing groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir, who of course are no friends of Australia or the National Socialist Network. Those sorts of groups are what is in mind here when it comes to dealing with extremism in this country. So we are working through provisions to make sure, as best possible, there are no unintended consequences in the legislation, but there's a bit of work to do. Again, all could have been avoided if the government had done their job properly right back at the beginning.
So you're looking at the detail now. It's important as a parliament, first of all, to express condolence and grief and so on, but I think you touched on it in an earlier answer. It's also to show solidarity in its legislative and parliamentary response as well, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Despite your criticisms of the process, and you're not alone in expressing those, but it's important as a parliament that there is some unity as well in terms of how we respond in terms of reform.
Otherwise, we will just see a continuation of what we have to date, which led to Bondi. So it is important we have a united approach here. And that's why we are being constructive, and we have been from the very beginning. It hasn't meant rather that we would sign a blank cheque. We were never going to do that. We warned against a take it or leave it approach, which is why we have had this process. The government came in, thumped a document on the table and said, well, here you go, you've got a week to pass it. That was never going to work. Now, they've seen sense. They dropped the racial vilification provisions, which are a massive risk. The rest we'll work through, and hopefully in a united way, we can leave Parliament this week and do the right thing by the Jewish community we've let down.
This, in terms of the vilification, though, the laws, do you hope that the government gets back to that, reminding those viewers who might not remember, but the Seagull report, Gillian Seagull had recommended laws of this nature, and the coalition, you guys were urging the government to adopt it. What was wrong in terms of how they dealt with it, and should they be pursuing it again?
Well, what was wrong? The way it was drafted came with significant risk and potential unintended consequences. And so therefore we needed to minimise, if not ameliorate, those risks altogether. It is important we protect freedom of speech.
But should they go back to it, given it was in the Siegel report?
Well, the government brought it in. They should consider bringing it back and indeed go through a proper process. These are something that can't be dealt with in a week and amended on the fly within a 7-day period. They are the biggest shift in laws that govern speech in this country in more than half a century, and we can't just whip through some bills and hope for the best and hope the courts get it right. So if the government choose to pursue this, then bring it back onto the agenda. Let's get it right. Let's not rush it. But in terms of what we have before us now, that they've backed down on those provisions, we'll try and get those right. That is important, as you say, for a united front so that we can show solidarity with this community that, frankly, as a country we've let down.
Yes, indeed. And that's got to be the top priority, doesn't it, to protect the Jewish community? Your proposal on December 18 said, under our package, our message to those who preach hatred, preach radical Islam, glorify terrorism or incite violence is clear. If you are not an Australian citizen, you'll be deported. If you are, you'll be arrested. Should that be the basis for a vilification law? Would you see that as the basis for your own proposal on that front?
Well,
targeted specific on anti-Semitism.
Yeah, so look, for what it's worth, the migration provisions in the legislation we have before us now do go to dealing with people who spread hate in our community and revoking a visa or refusing it if they intend to come in. So part of that is covered and we're inclined favourably with that, but still some work to go. In terms of vilification, again, we need to go through the work and get it right. Okay. We have had those options on the table since December 18. We'll continue to work with the government around making sure that we stamp out extremism, Islamic extremism in this country, and anti-Semitism.
Indeed. Well, we wait to see whether the compromise is achieved. Just finally, Mike Pizzullo was on the program earlier, the former Home Affairs Secretary. He says the law reform is fine, but it's got to be about a tougher implementation of what we've already got. That the ball was dropped in terms of the counterterrorism apparatus. Do you agree with that?
Well, these are the questions that can only be answered by a Royal Commission, one we were calling for, along with nearly the rest of Australia, for quite some time. Now we're having it. That's great. We will be able to get to the bottom of some of these issues. There are laws there. The Criminal Code covers a range of measures that could have been implemented. Information and resource sharing between counter-terror agencies, state and federal, and even within the federal domain. We need to make sure that's all working. We need to make sure it's appropriately resourced. And if there are any legislative changes needed to increase powers, let's get on that too.
Shadow Home Affairs Minister Jonathon, a busy day for you. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks.